Welcome everyone to the Tuesday reading stream. Again, I'm not in a uniform. I couldn't really give it that. um, I had to delay this by a day. Um, so I just was too busy yesterday. So I had to just delay it. And the gaming stream will probably be delayed until Friday as well. Um, I would probably say I might keep it. I might try and keep it to perhaps Tuesday nights or um well the game stream might move around a bit just given when I work it's usually like a bloody 6 o'clock start, so I'm like a bit early, but I suppose I really don't do any invites. We've got lines for room. One person in. Okay. So today, of course, I will be finishing off COVID-19, the Great Reset. Woohoo! Finish this book, and then next week I will begin reading. Next week I will begin reading Vladimir Lenin's Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. So that will be the next book to read. So yes, we will have some fun with this one, and then rather than reading The Age of Surveillance Capitalism after this, I'm thinking about going into some uh, some other stuff instead. Perhaps some of the works of Michael Hudson, namely Super Imperialism, the strategy or the economic strategy of American Empire. Um, there is another book there. We'll read based on Australia. So it's called Sub Imperial Power Australia in the International Arena. And it's basically arguing that Australia is not a sovereign country, that our independence is. Uh, yeah. Um, and then I think I could probably round things out with Carol Quigley's The Anglo-American Stabbing, which, um, which that one will be a BB because that is the modicum of truth behind New World Order conspiracy theories, or at least those that existed in the 20s. Um, but yeah, so we will get started with this one. Kicking off chapter 3, non record. I just quickly share. Yeah, the same size as last time. So, yep. Chapter 3, Individual Reset. Like for macro and micro effects, the pandemic will have profound, diverse consequences for all of us as individuals. For many, it has already been life-shutting. To date, COVID-19 forced the majority of people the world over to self-isolate from families and friends, has thrown into complete disarray personal and professional plans, and has deeply undermined their sense of economic and sometimes psychological and political security. We have all been reminded of our innate human fragility, our frailties, and our flaws. This realization, combined with the stress engendered by the lockdown and an inherent deep sense of uncertainty about what is coming next, could, albeit surreptitiously, change us in the way we relate to other people and to our world. For some, that starts as a change may end up as an individually reset. 3.1, redefining our feelings. The better angels in our nature are not. Psychologists point out that the pandemic, like most transformative events, has the ability to bring out the best and the worst, angels or demons. What is the evidence so far? At first glance, it seems the pandemic may have brought people together. In March 2020, images from Italy, the country hit hardest at that time, conveyed the impression that the collective war ethic was one of the only unexpected upsides to COVID-19 catastrophe that was engaging the country. As the whole population went into lockdown times, innumerable examples showed that, as a result, people not only had more time for each other, but also seemed to be kinder to them. The outlets for this enhanced collective sensitivity range from famous opera singers performing for their neighbors from their balcony to a nightly ritual of the population singing health workers' praises, a phenomenon that extended to almost the whole of Europe, plus diverse acts of mutual help and support for those who need it. Italy, in a sense, led the way. And since, throughout the period of confinement throughout the world, there have been comparable widespread examples of remarkable personal and social solidarity. Everywhere, simple acts of kindness, generosity, and altruism are thought to be becoming the norm. In terms of what we value, the notions of cooperation, communitarian ideas, the sacrifice of self-interest for the common good, and caring, paying for the poor. Conversely, manifestations of individual power, popularity, and prestige were frowned upon, even eclipsing the appeal of the rich and famous that faded as the pandemic progressed. One commentator observed the coronavirus had the effect of swiftly dismantling the cult of celebrity, a key feature of our modernity, noting the dream of class mobility dissipates when society locks down, the economy stalls, the death count mounts, and everyone's future is frozen inside their own crowded apartments or palatial mansion. The difference between the two has never been more obvious. A variety of such observations have prompted not only social commentators, but also the general public itself to ponder whether the pandemic succeeded in bringing out the best of us, and in doing so, triggering a search for higher meaning. Many questions came to mind, like, might the pandemic give birth to better selves and to a better world? Will it be followed by a shift of value? Will we become more willing to nurture our human bonds and more intentional about maintaining our social connections? Simply put, will we become more caring and compassionate? History is any guide. Natural disasters like hurricanes and earthquakes bring people together, while pandemics do the opposite. They drive them apart. The reason could be the following. Confronted with a sudden, violent, and often brief natural disaster, populations bond together and tend to recover relatively fast. By contrast, pandemics are longer lasting, prolonged events that often elicit ongoing feelings of distrust via the others, rooted in a primal fear of dying. Psychologically, the most important consequence of the pandemics is to generate a phenomenal amount of uncertainties that often become the source of angst. We do not know what tomorrow will bring. Will there be another wave of COVID-19? Will it affect people I love? Will I keep my job? And such a lack of surety makes us easy and uneasy and troubled. As human beings, we crave certainty, hence the need for cognitive growth. Anything that can help erase the uncertainty and ambiguity that paralyze our abilities to function normally. In the context of a pandemic, the risks are complex, difficult to grasp, and largely unknown. Thus confronted, we are more likely to retrench rather than look to the needs of others, as tends to happen with sudden, natural or not, disasters. And in fact, contrary to the prevailing first impression conveyed by the media. This in turn becomes a profound source of pain, a key sentiment that drives people's attitudes and reactions during pandemic. Shame is a moral emotion that equates with fear and power, an uncomfortable sentiment that mixes regret, self-hate, and a vague sense of dishonor, of not doing the right thing. Shame has been described and analyzed in countless novels and literary texts written about historical outbreaks. It can take forms of radical and horrendous, parents abandoning their children to their fate. At the beginning of the Decameron, a series of novellas that tell the tale of a group of men and women sheltered in a villa, the Black Death ravaged Florence 1348. Boccaccio writes that fathers and mothers were found to abandon their own children, untended, unvisited for their fate. In the same vein, numerous literary accounts of past pandemics, from Defoe's A Journal of the Plagues Year and Romans the Story, relate how, so often, fear of death ends up overriding all other feelings. in every situation, individuals are forced to make decisions about saving their own lives. It results in profound shame. It is the selfishness of their ultimate choice. Thankfully, there are always exceptions, as we saw most poignantly during COVID-19, such as among the nurses and doctors whose multiple acts of companion and courage on so many occasions went well beyond the call of their professional duty. But they seem to do just that, exception. In The Great Influenza, a book that analyzed the Spanish flu effects on the US at the end of World War One, the historian John Barry recounts that health workers did not find enough volunteers to help. The more virulent the flu became, the less people were willing to volunteer. The collective sense of shame that ensued might be one of the reasons why our general knowledge that the 1918 to 1919 pandemic was so scant. Despite that, in the US alone, it killed 12 times more people than the war itself. This perhaps also explains why today so few books or plays have been written. Psychologists tell us that cognitive closure often falls to black and white thinking and simplistic solution. A terrain propitious for conspiracy theories and the propagation of rumors, fake news, mistruths, and other pernicious ideas. In such a context, we look for leadership, authority, and clarity, meaning that the question as to whom we trust within our immediate community and among our leaders becomes critical. In consequence, so too does the countervailing issue of fluency. In conditions of stress, the appeal, cohesion, and unity increases, which leads us to coalesce around our clan or our group, and to generally become more sociable within it, not behind it. It seems only natural that our sense of vulnerability increases, as does our dependence and those around us, as for a lady or a childless. Our attachment to those close to us strengthens, with renewed sense of appreciation for all those loved, family, and friends. But there is a darker side to this. It also triggers a rise, patriotic, nationalist sentiments, with troubling religious ethnic considerations also coming with it. In the end, this toxic mix gets the worst of us at a safety group. Orhan Pamuk, the Turkish author who was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2006, in his latest novel, Nazi Code, which due to be published at the end of 2020, recounts how people have always responded to epidemics by spreading rumors and false information and portraying the disease as foreign and brought in with malicious intent. Yeah, that sounds right. This attitude leads us to look for a scapegoat, the commonality of all outbreaks throughout history. And it's the reason why unexpected and uncontrollable outbursts of violence, fear cells, panic, and rebellion are common in accounts, plague epidemics from the Renaissance. Scapegoat, yeah. I think didn't the Black Death get blamed on the Jews? I think like I literally think that happened like on multiple occasions. There were like pogroms because like the Jews got blamed for outbreaks of Black Death, which you know goes to show how much anti-Semitism evolved over the centuries. Hamid adds, the history and literature of plagues shows us that the intensity of the suffering, of the fear of death, of the metaphysical dread, of the sense of the uncanny, experienced by the stricken populace will also determine the depth of their anger and political destiny. The COVID-19 pandemic has unequivocally shown us all that we live in a world that is interconnected, and yet largely bereft of solidarity between nations, and often even within them. Throughout the periods of confinement, remarkable examples of personal solidarity have surfaced, along with counterexamples of selfish behavior. At the global level, the virtue of helping each other has been conspicuous by its absence. This despite the anthropological evidence that what sets us apart as humans is the ability to cooperate with each other and form in the process something bigger and greater than ourselves. Will COVID-19 result in people withdrawing into themselves, or will it nourish their innate sense of empathy and collaboration, encouraging them towards greater solidarity? The examples of previous pandemics are not very encouraging, but this time there is fundamental difference. We're all collectively aware that without greater collaboration, we would be unable to address the global challenges we collectively face. Put in the simplest possible terms, if, as human beings, we do not collaborate to confront our existential challenges, the environment and the global governance freefall of others, we are doomed. Thus, we have no choice but to summon up the better angels our maker. Moral choices. The pandemic has forced all of us, citizens and policymakers alike, willingly or not, to enter into a philosophical debate about how to maximize the common good in the least damaging way possible. First and foremost, it prompted us to think more deeply about what the common good really means. Common good is that which benefits society as a whole. Then how do we decide collectively what is best for us and the community? Is it about preserving GDP growth and economic activity at any cost to try to prevent unemployment rising? Is it about caring for the most fragile members of our community and making sacrifices for one another? Is it something in between? And if it is, what trade-offs are involved? Some schools of philosophical thought, like libertarianism, for which individual freedom matters the most, and utilitarianism, for which the pursuit of the best outcome for the greatest number makes that sense, may even dispute that the common good is a cause worth pursuing. It can conflict between competing moral theories and goal. Yes, it's the left libertarian. But there is no individual freedom without collective freedom, and there is no collective freedom without individual freedom. If the two of them work dialectically together, they cannot be one without the other. The pandemic brought them to a boil, with furious arguments between opposing camps. Many decisions framed as cold and rational, driven exclusively by economic, political, and social considerations, are in fact deeply influenced by moral philosophy. The endeavor to find a theory that is capable of explaining what we should do. Actually, almost every single decision related to how best to deal with the pandemic could be reframed as ethical choice, reflecting that, in almost all instances, human practices labor under moral consideration. Shall I give to those who have nothing and show empathy to those whose opinions differ than mine? Is it all right to lie to the public for some greater good? Is it acceptable not to help my neighbors who are infected with COVID-19? Shall I lay off the number of employees in hope of keeping my business afloat for the others? Is it okay to escape to my holiday home for my own advance, safety, and comfort? Or should I offer it to someone whose need exceeds mine? Shall I ignore the confinement order to assist a friend or family member? Every single decision, big or small, has an ethical component. And the way in which we respond to all these questions is what eventually enables us to aspire to a better life. Like all notions of moral philosophy, the idea of common good is elusive and contestable. Since the pandemic started, it has provoked furious debates about whether to use a utilitarian calculus when trying to tame the pandemic, or to stick to the sacrosanct principle of the sanctity of life. Nothing crystallizes the issue of ethical choice more than the debates that raged during the initial lockdowns about the trade-off between public health and the future growth. As we said earlier, almost all economists have debunked the myth that sacrificing a few lives will save the economy. But, irrespective of these experts' judgment, the debates and arguments went on. In the US in particular, but not exclusively, some policymakers took the line that it was justifiable to value the economy over life, endorsing a policy choice that would have been unimaginable in Asia or Europe, where such pronouncements would have been tantamount to committing political suicide. This realization probably explains UK Prime Minister Johnson's hasty retreat from an initial policy advocating herd immunity, often portrayed by experts and the media as an example of social Darwinism. The prioritization of business over life is a long tradition, running from the merchants of Siena during the Great Plague to those Amber that tried to conceal the cholera outbreak of 1892. However, it seems almost incongruous that it would remain alive today, with all the medical knowledge and scientific data we have at our disposal. The argument put forward by some groups like Americans for Prosperity is that the sessions were ticket. This, while undoubtedly true, is a fact that is itself rooted in policy choices informed by ethical considerations. In the US, recessions do indeed pull a lot of proof because the absence or limited nature of any social safety nets makes them lack them. How? When people lose their jobs with no state support and no health insurance, they tend to die of despair to suicides, drug overdoses, and alcoholism, as shown and extensively analyzed by Alan Pace and Angus Deaton. Economic recessions also provoke deaths outside of the US. But policy choices in terms of health insurance and work protection can ensure that there are considerably fewer. This is ultimately a moral choice about whether to prioritize the qualities of individualism or those that favor the destiny of the community. Is it an individual as well as a collective choice that can be expressed through election? Or it is But the example of the pandemic shows that tightly individualistic society are not very good at expressing solidarity. In the immediate post-pandemic era, following the first wave in early 2020, and at a time when many economies around the world are sliding into deep recessions, the specter of more severe lockdowns seems politically inconceivable. Even the richest countries cannot afford to endure a lockdown indefinitely, not even a year. The consequences, particularly in terms of unemployment, would be horrific, resulting in a dramatic fallout of society's poorest individual well-being. As the economist and philosopher Amartya Sen put it, the presence of disease kills people, and the absence of livelihood also kills people. Therefore, now the testing and contact tracing capacities are widely available, many individual collective decisions will of necessity involve complex cost-benefit analyses and even sometimes rural utilitarian calculations. Every policy decision will become an exceedingly delicate compromise between saving as many lives as possible, permitting the economy to run as fully effective. Bioethicists and moral philosophers often argue amongst themselves about counting life years lost or saved rather than just the number of deaths that occurred or that could have been avoided. Peter Singer, a professor of bioethics, author of The Life Seeking Sound, is a prominent voice among those who adhere to the theory that we should take into account the number of lives we've lost, not just the number of lives. He gives the following example. In Italy, the average age of those dying with COVID-19 is almost 80 years, which could prompt us to ask the following question. How many years of life were lost in Italy? Considering that many of the people who died from the virus are not only elderly, but also have underlying medical conditions. Some economists roughly estimate that Italians lost perhaps an average of 3 years of life, a very different outcome as compared to the 40 or 60 years of life lost from numerous young people killed as a result of war. The purpose of this example is this. Today, almost everyone the world over has an opinion as to whether a lockdown in her or his country is severe or not severe enough, whether it should have been shortened or extended, whether it was appropriately put into place or not, whether it is properly enforced or not. Often, framing issues have an objective side. In reality, all these judgments and pronouncements that we constantly make are determined by underlying ethical considerations that are eminently personal. Simply put, what we expose as facts or opinions are moral choices that the pandemic has blazed bare. They are made in the name of what we think is right or wrong and therefore define us as who we are. Just one simple example to illustrate that. World Health Organization and most national health authorities recommend that we wear a mask in public. What has been framed as an epidemiological necessity and an easy risk mitigating measure has turned into a political battle. In the US, and also but less so in other countries, the decision to wear a mask or not become politically charged since it is considered as an infringement to personal freedom. Behind the political declaration, refusing to wear a mask in public is a moral choice, as indeed is the decision to wear one. Does this tell us something about the moral principles that underpin our faith? Probably yes. The pandemic also compelled us to reconsider the critical importance of fairness, highly subjective matter, yet essential societal harmony. Taking fairness into consideration reminds us that some of the most basic assumptions we make in economics have a moral element embedded. Should, for example, fairness or justice be considered when looking at the law of supply and demand? And what does the response tell us about ourselves? This quintessential moral issue came to the fore during the most acute phase of the pandemic in early 2020, when shortages of some basic necessities like oil and toilet paper and critical supplies for dealing with COVID-19 like masks and ventilators started to occur. What was the right response? Let the laws of supply and demand work their magic so that prices rise high enough for the market, or rather regulate demand or even prices fall. In a famous paper review in 1986, Daniel Kahneman and Richard Thaler, who was subsequently awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics, explored this issue and concluded that rising prices in an emergency is simply unacceptable from a societal standpoint, as it will be perceived unfair. Some economists may argue that higher prices triggered by supply and demand are effective insofar as they discourage panic buying, but most people would consider this an issue that has little to do with economics and more to do with a sentiment of fairness and of moral value. Most companies understand this. Raising the price of a good that is needed in a extreme situation like the pandemic, particularly if it is a mask or hand sanitizer, is not only offensive, but flies in the face of what is considered morally and socially acceptable. For this reason, Amazon prohibited price gouging on its site, and large retail chains responded to the shortages not by raising the price of the goods, but by limiting the quantity that each customer could buy. That was what happened here. It is hard to tell whether these moral considerations constitute a reset and whether they will have a long-lasting post-coronavirus effect on our attitudes and behaviors. At the very least, we could assume that we are now more individually aware of the fact that our decisions are infused with values and informed by moral choices. It might follow that if, but it is a big risk, in the future we abandon the posture of self-interest that pollutes so many of our social interactions, we may be able to pay more attention to issues like inclusivity and fairness. Oscar Wilde had already highlighted this problem in 1892 by depicting a cynic as a man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. 3.2. Mental health and well-being. For years now, an epidemic of mental health has engulfed much of the world. The pandemic has already made it worse and will continue to do so. Most psychologists, and certainly all those we talk to, seem to concur with the judgment expressed in May 2020 by one of their peers. The pandemic has had a devastating effect on mental health. Unlike physical illness, people with mental health issues often have wounds that are invisible to a non-professional's naked eye. Yet, in the past decade, mental health specialists report an explosion of mental health problems, ranging from depression and suicide, psychosis, and addiction disorders. In 2017, an estimated 350 million people around the globe were suffering from depression. At that time, the World Health Organization predicted that depression would become the second main cause of disease burden globally by 2020, and that it would overtake ischemic heart disease as the leading cause of disease burden by 2030. In the US, the CDC estimated in 2017 that depression affected more than 26% of adults. Approximately 1 in 20 report moderate to severe symptoms. At that time, it also predicted that 25% of American adults would suffer from mental illness during the year, and almost 50% would develop at least one mental illness during their life. Similar figures that may be more severe and trends exist in most countries around the world. In the workplace, the issue of mental health become one of the big elephants in the room. The epidemic of work-related stress, depression, and anxiety seems to be continuously getting worse. As a revealing example, in 2017 to 2018 in the UK, stress, depression, and anxiety accounted for more than half, 57%, of total working days lost due to ill health. For many people, traversing the COVID-19 pandemic really defined living a personal trauma. The scars inflicted may last for years. To start with, in the early months of the outbreak, it was all too easy to fall victim to the biases of availability and salience. These two mental shortcuts caused us to obsess and ruminate about the pandemic and its dangers. Availability makes us rely on immediate examples that come to mind when evaluating something. And salience predisposes us to focus on things that are more prominent or emotionally striking. For months, COVID-19 became almost the only news that was inevitably almost exclusively bad. Relentless reports of deaths, infectious cases, and all the other things that might go wrong, together with emotionally charged imageries, allowed our collective imaginations to run riot and to worry about ourselves and our closest loved ones. Such an alarming atmosphere had disastrous effects on our mental well-being. Furthermore, media amplified anxiety can be very contagious. All this fed into a reality that for so many amounted to personal tragedy, whether defined by the economic impact of income loss and job losses, and or the emotional impact of domestic violence, group isolation, and loneliness, or the inability to properly grieve for deceased loved ones. Humans are inherently social beings. Companionship and social interactions are a vital component of our human needs. If deprived of them, we find our lives turned upside down. Social relations are, to a significant extent, obliterated by confinement measures and physical or social distancing. And in the case of the COVID-19 lockdowns, this occurred at a time of heightened anxiety when we needed them most. The rituals that are inherent to our human condition, handshakes, hugs, kisses, and many others were suppressed. A loneliness and isolation resulted. For now, we know neither whether nor when we might return completely to our old way of life. At any stage of the pandemic, but particularly towards the end of the lockdowns, mental discomfort remained with us. Even after the period of acute stress passed, something that psychologists have called the third quarter phenomenon, in reference to people who live in isolation for a protracted period of like polar spoils or acting. They tend to experience problems and tensions toward the end of things. Like these people, but on a planetary scale, our collective sense of mental well-being is taken materially severe now. Having dealt with the first wave, we are now anticipating another that may or may not come. And this toxic emotional mix risks producing a collective state of the inability to make plans or engage in specific activities that used to be intrinsic parts of our normal life, a frightful sort of playground, like visiting family and friends abroad, planning ahead for the next term at university, applying for a new job, has the potential to lead us to news and be more of that. In many people, the strains and stresses of the immediate dilemmas that allowed that follow the end of lockdowns will last for months. Is it safe to go on public transport? Is it too risky to go to a fake restaurant? Is it appropriate to visit this elderly family member or friend? For a long time to come, these very banal decisions be painted with a sense of dread, particularly for those who are vulnerable because of their age or health condition. At the time of writing, June 2020, the impact of the pandemic in terms of mental health cannot be quantified or assessed in a generalized way, but broad contours are known. In a nutshell, one, individuals with pre-existing mental health conditions like depression will increasingly suffer from anxiety disorders. Two, social distancing measures, even after they have been rolled out, will have worsened mental health issues. Three, in many families, the loss of income consecutive to unemployment will plunge people into debt and despair. Four, domestic violence and abuse, particularly against women and children, will increase as long as the pandemic endures. Five, vulnerable people and children, those in jail, with socioeconomically disadvantaged and the disabled need of an above average level of support will be particularly at risk of increased mental distress. Let us review below some of these in detail. The many an explosion of mental problems occurred during the first month of the pandemic and will continue to progress in the post-pandemic era. In March 2020, at the onset of the pandemic, a group of researchers published a study in The Lancet that found that confinement methods produced a range of severe mental health outcomes. such as trauma and feeding. Although avoiding the most severe mental health issues, a large portion of the world population is found to have suffered stress in various degrees. First and foremost, it is among those already prone to mental health issues, the challenges inherent in the response to the coronavirus, lockdowns, isolation, and risk will be exacerbated. Some will weather the storm, but certain individuals, a diagnostic of depression or anxiety will escalate one acute clinical. There are also significant numbers of people who, for the first time, present symptoms of the serious mood disorders like mania, signs of depression, or psychotic experiences. These were all triggered by events directly or indirectly associated with the pandemic and the lockdowns, such as isolation, loneliness, fear of catching a disease, losing a job, bereavement, concerns about family members, friends. In May 2020, the National Health Service England's clinical director, mental health, told a parliamentary committee that the demand for mental health care would increase significantly once the lockdown ended, and would see people needing treatment for trauma for years to come. There is no reason to believe the situation will be very different elsewhere. Domestic violence has risen during the pandemic. It remains difficult to measure the precise increase if a high number of cases remain unreported, but it is nonetheless clear that the rise in incidences was fueled by a combination of anxiety and economic uncertainty. With the lockdowns, all the requisite ingredients for an increase in domestic violence are less. Isolation from friends, family, and employment, the occasion of constant surveillance, crime, and physical proximity to and its partner, often themselves under more stress, unlimited or no option for escape. The conditions of lockdown magnified existing abusive behavior, leaving little or no respite for things and their children outside of home. Projections from the United Nations Population Fund indicate that if domestic violence increases by 20% during the period of lockdown, there would be an additional 15 million cases of intimate partner violence on the phone for an average lockdown duration of 6 months or 3 months, 31 million cases for an average lockdown of 6 months, 45 million for an average lockdown of 9 months, and 61 million if the average lockdown period was the last 1 year. These are global figures, inclusive of all the 193 UN member states, and represent the high levels of underreported characteristic of gender-based violence. All told, they total an additional 15 million cases of gender-based violence every 3 months. A lockdown continues. It is hard to predict how domestic violence will evolve in the post-pandemic era. Conditions of hardship will make it more likely that much will depend on how individual countries control the two pathways through which domestic violence occurs. 1. The reduction in prevention and protection efforts, social services, care. And 2. The concomitant increase in the incidence of violence. This subchapter concludes with the point that may seem anecdotal, but there's gained some relevance in an era of relentless online meetings that could expand in the foreseeable future. Our video conversations on mental well-being are our bedfellows. During the lockdowns, video conversations were for many a personal and professional lifesaver, allowing us to maintain human connections, long-distance relationships, and connections with our colleagues. But they have also generated a phenomenon of mental exhaustion, popularized as Zoom fatigue, condition that applies to the use of any video They've also generated a phenomenon of mental exhaustion and popularized Zoom fatigue and conditioned it applies to the use of any video interface. During the lockdowns, screens and videos so widely solicited for communication purposes that this equated to a new social experiment conducted at scale. The conclusion, our brains find it difficult and sometimes unsettling to conduct virtual interaction, especially if and when such interactions account in the quasi-totality of our professional and personal exchanges. We are social animals for whom the many minor and often non-verbal cues that normally occur during physical social interactions are vital in terms of communication and mutual understanding. When we talk to someone in the flesh, we don't only concentrate on the words they are saying, but also focus on a multitude of infra-language signals that help us make sense of the exchange we are having. Is the lower body of the person facing us or turned away? What do their hands do? What's the tone of their general body language? How is the person breathing? A video conversation makes the interpretation of these nonverbal cues hard for a subtle meaning possible, and it forces us to concentrate exclusively on words and facial expressions, sometimes altered by the quality of the video. On a virtual conversation, we have nothing other than intense, prolonged eye contact, which can easily become intimidating or even threatening, particularly when a hierarchical relationship exists. This problem is magnified by the gallery view, when the central vision of our brains risks being challenged by the sheer number of people on view. There is a threshold beyond which we cannot decode so many people at once. Psychologists have a word for this: continuous partial attention. It is as if our brain were trying to multitask, in vain at first. At the end of the call, the constant search for nonverbal cues that cannot be found simply overwhelms our brain. And yet the feeling of being drained of energy and left with a sense of profound dissatisfaction. This in turn negatively affects our sense of mental well-being. The impact of COVID-19 has given rise to a wider and deeper array of mental health problems affecting greater numbers of population, many of whom might be scared in the immediate future and is not in sustainable. Viewed in these terms, coronavirus has reinforced, not reset, our issues. However, what the pandemic has achieved with respect to mental health, and in so many other domains, is the acceleration of completely existing care. With this has come heightened public awareness of the severity of mental health, the most significant single factor affecting people's level of satisfaction with their lives, is already on the radar screen of politics. In the post-pandemic era, these issues may now be given the priority they deserve. This indeed constitutes quite a reset. I'm going to roll a cigarette before starting. Since I'm just going to finish this, it'll literally just be online. And it's the stream until I'm done. But it's really not. It's really not tight. Maybe here until 10 perhaps. So like a 3.5 hours range. That's how far I should got. Late night workout. At least we're over halfway. 3.3. Changing priorities. Much has already been written about the way in which the pandemic might change us, how we think about these and how these do things. Yet we are still in the very early days, but we don't even know yet whether the pandemic is behind us. And in the absence of data and research, all conjectures about our future selves are highly speculative. Nonetheless, we foresee some possible changes that dovetail with the micro and macro issues given in this book. COVID-19 may compel us to address our inner problems in ways we would not have previously considered. We may start asking ourselves some fundamental questions that would never have arisen without the crisis and the lockdown. By doing so, reset our mental map. Existential crises like the pandemic confront us with their own fears, anxieties, and afford great opportunities for introspection. They force us to ask the questions that truly matter and can also make us more creative. Well, history shows that new forms of individual and collective organization often emerge after economic and social depression. We've already provided examples of past pandemics that radically changed the course each day. Times of adversity, innovation often thrives. Necessity has long been recognized as the mother of things. This may prove to be partially true for the COVID-19 pandemic. It forced many of us to slow down and gave us more time to reflect, away from the pace and frenzy of our normal world. With a very significant exception, of course, of the dozens of millions heroic workers in healthcare, grocery stores, and supermarkets, and parents with young children that feature caring for elderly or handicapped relatives need constant. Offering as it did gifts of more time, greater stillness, more solitude, even if an excess of the latter sometimes resulted in loneliness. Pandemic provided an opportunity to think more deeply about who we are, what really matters, and what we want, both as individuals and as a society. This period of enforced collective reflection could give rise to a change in behavior that will in turn trigger a more profound reconsideration of our beliefs and convictions. This could result in a shift in our priorities that would in turn affect our approach to many aspects of our everyday lives. How we socialize, take care of our family members, friends, exercise, manage our health, shop, educate our children, and even how we see our future. Increasingly obvious questions may come to the fore, like, do we know what is important? Are we too selfish and focused on ourselves? Do we give too great a priority and excessive time to our career? Are we slaves to consumerism? In the post-pandemic era, thanks to the pause for thought it offered some of us, and responses may well have evolved as compared to what our pre-pandemic selves answered. Let us consider, in an arbitrary and non-exclusive fashion, some of these potential changes whose likelihood of occurrence, it seems to us, even if not very high, is nonetheless greater than commonly seen. Creativity. It may be a cliche to say, but what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. But Friedrich Nietzsche had a point. Not everybody who survives the pandemic emerges from it stronger, far from it. However, few individuals do, with actions and achievements that may sound marginal at the time, and with hindsight seem to have made tremendous impact. Being creatively minded helps. So does being in the right place, like the right industry, at the right time. There is little doubt, we said, that in the next few years we will witness an explosion of creativity, startups, and new ventures in the digital and biotechnological space. The pandemic has blown following winds to sales rate, suggesting that we will see a good deal of progress, much innovation on the part of the most creative and original individuals in these sectors. The most gifted entrepreneurs will have the year today. The same may well happen in the realms of science and the arts. Illustrious past episodes corroborate that creative characters thrive in market. Isaac Newton, for one, flourished in the UK. When Cambridge University had to shut down in summer of 1665 outbreak, Newton went back to his family home in Lincolnshire, where he stayed for more than a year. During this period of forced isolation described as annus mirabilis, a remarkable year, it had an outpouring of creative energy that formed the foundation for his theories of gravity, optics, and in particular, the development of the inverse square law of gravitation. There was an apple tree beside the house near the attention as if he compared the fall of an apple with motion of the orbital. Similar principle of creativity appears applies to literature, and is at the origin of some of the most famous literary works in the Western world. Scholars argue that the closure of theatres in London, forced by the plague of 1593, helped Shakespeare turn to poetry. This is when he published Venus and Adonis, a popular narrative poem in which the goddess called a kiss from a boy derived infection from the Dharmasena. Few years later, at the beginning of the 17th century, theatres in London were more often closed than open to cognitive evolved play. An official rule stipulated that theatre performances should have to be cancelled when the deaths caused by the plague exceeded 30 people per week. In 1606, Shakespeare was very prolific precisely because theatres were closed by the epidemic and his truth was inspired. In just 1 year, he wrote King Lear, Macbeth, and Antony and Cleopatra. The Russian author Alexander Pushkin had a similar experience. In 1830, following a cholera epidemic that had reached Nizhny Novgorod, he found himself in Moscow and potential escape. Suddenly, after years of personal turmoil, he felt relieved, free, and happy. The 3 months he spent in quarantine were the most creative and productive of his life. He finished Eugene Onegin, his masterpiece, and wrote a series of sketches, one of which was called Feast During the Day. We cite these historical examples of flourishing personal creativity in some of our greatest artists during this plague or pandemic, not to minimize or distract from the catastrophic financial impact that the COVID-19 crisis is having on the world of culture and entertainment, but instead to provide a glimmer of hope and a source of inspiration. Creative, Creativity is at its most abundant in the cultural and artistic sectors of our societies and history, has shown us has shown that this very creativity can prove a major source of resilience. A multitude of such examples exist. This is an unusual form of reset, but it should not surprise us. When devastating things happen, creativity and ingenuity have up. Fine. In Joshua Ferris's novel, 2007, Then We Come to the End, one character observes, what some days felt longer than other days. Some days felt like 2 whole days. This happened on a worldwide scale as a result of the pandemic. It altered our sense of time. In the midst of their respective lockdowns, many people made references to the fact that days in confinement seemed to last an eternity, and yet the weeks went by surprisingly fast. With, again, the fundamental exception that those who were in the trenches, all the essential work that we have already mentioned, many people in lockdown felt the sameness of the days, with every day similar to the previous and to the next, barely any distinction between the working days and the weekend. It is as if time had become amorphous and undifferentiated, with all the markers normal division flat. In a fundamentally different context, but within a similar type of experience, prisoners who face the harshest and most radical form of confinement learn this. The days drag, and then you wake up, and a month has passed, and you think, where the hell was that guy? Victor Serge, a Russian revolutionary who was repeatedly jailed, said the same. There are swift hours and very long seconds. Could these observations compel some of us reconsider our relationship with time to better recognize how precious it is and not let it slip by unnoticed? We live in an era of extreme velocity, where everything goes much faster than ever because technology has created a culture of quickness. In this real-time society where everything is needed and wanted right away, we constantly feel pressed for time, like the nagging feeling that the pace of life is ever increasing. Might the experience of the lockdowns alter this? Could the experience at our own individual level be equivalent of what just-in-time supply chains will do in the post-pandemic era? Suppression of time acceleration with the benefit of greater resilience is fine. Might the need to become more psychologically resilient force us to slow down and become more mindful of passing time? Maybe. This could be one of the unexpected upsides of COVID-19 and lockdowns. It made us more aware and sensitive about the great markers of time, the precious moments spent with friends and our families, the seasons of nature, the myriad of small things that require a bit of time, like talking to a stranger, listening to a bird, or admiring a piece of art that help contribute to well-being. The reset in the post-pandemic era, we might have different appreciation of time, pursuing it for greater happiness. Consumption. Ever since the pandemic took hold, many column issues and analyses have been dedicated to the impact that COVID-19 will have on our consumption patterns. A substantial number of them state that in the post-pandemic era, we will become more conscious of the consequences of our choices, habits, and will decide to repress some forms of consumption. At the other end of the spectrum, a few analysts forecast revenge consumption, taking the form of a surge in spending after the lockdowns end, predicting a strong revival of our animal spirits and a return to the situation that prevails before the pandemic. Revenge consumption hasn't happened yet. Maybe it won't happen at all. Something of self-restraint between that. The underlying argument supporting this hypothesis is the one to which we referred in the chapter on environmental risk. The pandemic has acted as a dramatic eye-opener to the public at large in the severity of the risks related to environmental degradation. Heightened awareness of and acute concern about inequality, combined with the realization that the threat of social unrest is real, immediate, on our doorstep, might have the same effect. When a tipping point is reached, extreme inequality begins to erode the social contract and increasingly results in anti-social, even criminal behavior, often directed at property. In response, consumption patterns must be seen. How might this play out? Conspicuous consumption could grow from state. Having the latest, most up-to-date model of whatever will no longer be a sign of status, but will be thought of as, at best, an touch, at worst, outright sin. Positional signaling be turned upside down. Projecting a message about oneself through a purchase and flaunting expensive stuff will simply become passive. Put in simple terms, in a post-pandemic world beset by unemployment and insufferable inequality, angst about the environment, the ostentatious display of wealth will no longer be accepted. The way forward may be inspired by the example of Japan together with a few other countries. Economists constantly worry about the possible japanification of the world, which we refer in much macro sense. But there is a much more positive japanification story that gives us a sense of where we may want to go with respect to consumption. Japan possesses two distinctive features that are epic. It has one of the lowest levels of inequality among high-income countries, and it has, since the burst of the speculative bubble in the late 1980s, had a lower level of conspicuous consumption sets it apart. Today, the positive value of minimalism, made viral by the Marie Kondo series, the lifelong pursuit of finding meaning and purpose in life, ikigai, and the importance of nature and the practice of forest bathing, Chirin Yoki, are being emulated in many parts of the world, even though they all espouse a relatively more frugal Japanese lifestyle as compared to the more consumerist societies. A similar phenomenon can be observed in Nordic countries, where conspicuous consumption is frowned upon and oppressed. But none of this makes them less happy. Quite the opposite. As psychologists and behavioral economists keep reminding us, overconsumption does not equate happiness. This might be another personal reset. The understanding that conspicuous consumption or excessive consumption of any kind is neither good for us nor for our planet, and the subsequent realization that a sense of personal fulfillment, satisfaction, and need not be reliant on relentless consumption. Perhaps quite the opposite. Nature and well-being. The pandemic has proven to be a real-time exercise in how to manage our anxiety and fears during a period of extraordinary confusion and uncertainty. One clear message has emerged from this. Nature is a formidable antidote to many of today's fears. Recent and abundant research explains incontrovertibly why it is so. Neuroscientists, psychologists, medical doctors, biologists, and microbiologists, specialists of physical performance, economists, social scientists, all in their respective fields can now explain why nature makes us feel good, how it eases physical and psychological pain, and why it is associated with so many benefits in terms of physical and mental well-being. Conversely, they can also show why being separated from nature in all its richness and variety, wildlife, trees, animals, and plants, negatively affects our minds, our bodies, our emotional lives, and our mental health. COVID-19 and the health authorities' constant reminders to walk or exercise every day to keep in shape place these considerations front and center. So did the myriads of individual testimonies during the lockdowns showing how much people in cities were longing for greenery. A forest, a park, a garden, or just a tree. Even in the countries with the strictest lockdown regimes, France, health authorities insisted on the need to spend some time outside every day. In the post-pandemic era, far fewer people will ignore the centrality and the essential role of nature in their lives. The pandemic made this awareness possible at scale, since now almost everybody in the world knows about this. This will create more profound and personal connections at an individual level with the macro points we made earlier about the preservation of our ecosystems and the need to produce and consume in ways that are respectful of the environment. We now know that without access to nature and all it has to offer in terms of biodiversity, our potential for physical and mental well-being is greater. Throughout the pandemic, we were reminded that rules of social distancing, hand washing and mask wearing, plus self-isolation for the most vulnerable people, are the standard tools to protect ourselves from COVID-19. Yet, two other essential factors that are strongly contingent upon our response upon our exposure to nature also play a vital role in our physical resilience lives, immunity and inflammation. Both contribute to protecting us, but immunity decreases with age while inflammation increases. To improve our chances of resisting the virus, immunity must be boosted and inflammation suppressed. What part did nature play in this? She is the leading lady, the science now tells us. The low level of constant inflammation experienced by our bodies leads to all sorts of diseases and disorders, ranging from cardiovascular conditions, depression, and reduced immune capability. This residual inflammation is more prevalent among people who live in cities, urban environments, and industrialized areas. It is now established that lack of connection with nature contributing factors to greater inflammation, with studies showing that the 2 hours spent in a forest can alleviate inflammation by heart- lowering cytokine levels, a marker of inflammation. All this boils down to lifestyle choices. Not only the time we spend in nature, but also what we eat, how we sleep, how much we eat. These are choices that point to an encouraging advocate. Age does not have to be a element. Ample research shows that together with nature, diet and physical exercise can slow, even sometimes reverse our biological decline. There is nothing fatalistic about it. Exercise, nature, unprocessed food, they all have the dual benefits of improving immunity, depressing inflammation. This dovetails the point we just made about consumption. It would be surprising if all this newly found evidence does not lead to greater awareness about responsibility. At the very least, the direction of the trend, less depredation, more sustainability, sees clear. The research for individuals, the pandemics have drawn our attention to the importance of nature. Going forward, paying more attention to our natural asset will progressively become. Conclusion. In June 2020, barely 6 months since the pandemic started, the world is in a different place. Within this short time frame, COVID-19 both triggered momentous changes, magnified the fault lines that already beset our economies and societies. Rising inequalities and widespread sense of unfairness, deepening geopolitical divides, political polarization, rising public deficits, high-level debt, ineffective or non-existent global governance, excessive financialization, environmental degradation. These are some of the major challenges that existed before the pandemic. The corona crisis has exacerbated the matter. Could the COVID-19 debacle be the lightning before the thunder? Could it have the force to ignite a series of profound changes? We cannot know what the world will be like in 10 months' time, even less what it will resemble in 10 years. But what we do know is that unless we do something to reset today's world, tomorrow will be profoundly shift. In Gabriel Garcia Marconi's Chronicle of a Death Toll, an entire village foresees a looming catastrophe, and yet none of the villagers seem able or willing to act to prevent it until it's too late. We do not want to do that first. To avoid such a fate, without delay, we need to set in motion the great reset. This is not a nice to have, but an absolute necessity. Failing to address and fix the deep-rooted ills of our societies and economies, but heighten the risk that, as throughout history, ultimately a reset will be imposed by violent shocks, like conflicts, and even revolution. It is incumbent upon us to take the bull by the horn. The pandemic gives us this chance. It represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. The deep crisis provoked by the pandemic has given us plenty of opportunities to reflect on how our economies and societies work and the ways in which they work. The verdict seems clear. We need to change. We should change. But can we? Will we learn from the mistakes we made in the past? Will the pandemic open the door to a better future? Will we get our global house in order? Simply put, will we put into motion the Great Reset? Resetting is an ambitious task, perhaps too ambitious, but we have no choice but to try our utmost to achieve it. It's about making the world less divisive, less polluting, less destructive, more inclusive, more equitable and fairer than we left it in a pre-pandemic era. Doing nothing or too little is the sleepwalk towards ever more social inequality, economic imbalances, injustice, and environmental degradation. Failing to act equates to letting our world become meaner, more divided, more dangerous, more selfish, and simply unbearable for large segments of the globe's population. To do nothing is not a viable option. That said, the Great Reset is far from a done deal. Some may resist the necessity to engage in it, fearful of the magnitude of the task and hopeful that the sense of urgency will subside and the situation will soon get back to normal. The argument for passivity goes like this. We have been through similar shocks: pandemics, harsh recessions, geopolitical divides, and social tensions before, and we will get through them again. As always, societies will rebuild, and so will our economies. Life goes on. The rationale for not resetting is also predicated on the conviction that the state of the world is not that bad and that we just need to fix a few things around the edges to make it better. It is true that the state of the world today is on average considerably better than in the past. We must acknowledge that, as human beings, we never had it so good. Almost all the key indicators that measure our collective welfare, like the number of people living in poverty or dying in conflicts, the GDP per capita, life expectancy or literacy rates, and even the number of deaths caused by pandemics, have been continuously improving over past centuries, impressively so in the last few decades. But they have been improving on average. A statistical reality that is meaningless for those who feel that so often are skewed. Therefore, the conviction that today's world is better than it has ever been, while correct, cannot serve as an excuse for taking comfort in the status quo and failing to fix the many ills that continue to afflict it. The tragic death of George Floyd, an African American killed by a police officer in May 2020, vividly illustrates this point. It was the first domino, or the last straw, that marked a momentous tipping point at which an accumulated and profound sentiment of unfairness felt by the U.S. African American community finally exploded into massive protests. We're pointing out to them that, on average, their loss is greater today than in the past, having appeased their anger? Of course not. What matters to African Americans is their situation today, not how much their condition has improved compared to 150 years ago when many of their ancestors lived in slavery. It was abolished in the USA in 1865, or even 50 years ago when marrying a white American was illegal. Interracial marriage only became legal in all states in 1967. 2 points are pertinent to the Great Reset in this. One, our human actions and reactions are not rooted in statistical data, but are determined instead by emotions and sentiments. Narratives drive our behavior. And two, as our human condition improves, our standards of living increase, and so do our expectations for a better and fairer life. In that sense, the widespread social protests that took place in June 2020 reflect the urgent necessity to embark on the Great Reset. By connecting an epidemiological risk, COVID-19, with the societal risk, protest, they made it clear that, today's world, it is the systemic connectivity between risks, issues, challenges, and also opportunities that matters and determines the future. In the first months of the pandemic, public attention has understandably been focused on the epidemiological and health effects of COVID-19. But moving forward, the most consequential problems lie in the concatenation of the economic, geopolitical, societal, environmental, and technological risks that will ensue from the pandemic and their ongoing impact on companies and individuals. There is no denying that the COVID-19 virus has more often than not been a personal catastrophe for the millions infected by it and for their families. However, on a global level, if viewed in terms of the percentage of the global population affected, the corona crisis is, so far, one of the least deadly pandemics the world has experienced over the last 2,000 years. In all likelihood, unless the pandemic evolves in an unforeseen way, the consequences of COVID-19 for health and mortalities will be mild for its previous pandemic. At the end of June 2020, at a time when the outbreak is still ravaging Latin America, South Asia, and much of the US, COVID-19 has killed less than 0.006% of the world population. To put this low figure into context, in terms of lethality, the Spanish flu killed 2.7% of the world population, and HIVs 0.6% from 1989 to today. The plague of Justinian, from its onset in 541 until it finally disappeared in 750, killed almost one-third of the population of Byzantium before it very suspect. And the Black Death is considered to have killed in 30% and 40% of the world's population at the time. The corona pandemic is infectious. It does not constitute an existential threat or a shock to believe the century on the world's population till death. However, it does entail worrisome perspectives for all the reasons already mentioned. In today's interdependent world, risks conflate with each other, amplifying their reciprocal effect and magnifying their consequences. Much of what's coming is unknown, but we can be sure of the following. In the post-pandemic world, questions of fairness become to the fore, ranging from stagnating real incomes for a vast majority to the very definition of our social contact. Similarly, deep concerns about the environment or questions about how technology can be deployed, governed for the benefit of society, will force their way onto the critical agenda. All these issues predated the pandemic, but COVID-19 has laid them bare for all to see and careful about. The direction of the trends hasn't changed, but the wake of COVID-19 makes that bigger faster. The absolute prerequisite for a proper reset is greater collaboration and cooperation within and between countries. Cooperation as supremely human cognitive ability that put our species on its unique and extraordinary trajectory can be summed up as shared intentionality to act together towards a common goal. We simply cannot progress without it. Will the post-pandemic era be characterized by more or less cooperation? A very real risk exists that tomorrow the world will be even more divided, nationalistic, and prone to conflicts than it is today. Many of the trends reviewed in the macro section suggest that, moving into the future, our world will be less open and less cooperative than before the pandemic. But an alternative scenario is possible, one in which collective action within communities and greater collaboration between nations enable a more rapid and peaceful exit from the corona crisis. As economies restart, there is an opportunity to embed greater societal equality and sustainability into the recovery, accelerating rather than delaying progress towards the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, unleashing a new era of prosperity. What could make this possible and raise the probability odds in favor of such an outcome? Seeing the failures and fault lines in the cruel light of day caused by the corona crisis may compel us to act faster by replacing failed ideas, institutions, processes, and rules with new ones better suited to current and future needs. This is the essence of the Great Reset. Could the globally shared experience of the pandemic help alleviate some of the problems we faced as the crisis started? Can a better society emerge from the lockdowns? Amartya Sen, laureate at the Nobel Prize in Economics, thinks so, believing that the need to act together can certainly generate an appreciation of the constructive role of public action, citing as proof some examples like World War II having made people realize the importance of international cooperation and convincing countries like the UK of the benefit of better shared food, healthcare, and the eventual creation of the welfare state. Jared Diamond, the author of Upheaval, How Nations Cope with Crisis and Change, is of similar opinion, hoping that the coronavirus crisis will compel us to address four existential risks that we collectively face. One, nuclear threats. Two, climate change. Three, the unsustainable use of essential resources like forests, seafood, topsoil, and fresh water. And four, the consequences of the enormous differences in standards of living between the various peoples. Strange as it may seem, the successful resolution of the pandemic crisis may motivate us to deal with these bigger issues that we have until now for at the front. If the pandemic does at last prepare us to deal with those existential threats, there may be a silver lining in the virus's dark cloud. Among the virus's consequences, it could prove to be the biggest, the most lasting, and our great cause for hope. These expressions of individual hope are supported by a multitude of surveys, including that we collectively desire change. They range from a poll in the UK showing that a majority of people have to fundamentally alter the economy as it recovers, in contrast to one-fourth wanting it to return to how it was. The international surveys finding that a large majority of citizens around the world want the economic recovery from the corona crisis to prioritize climate change and support a green recovery. Worldwide, movements demanding a better future and calling for a shift to an economic system that prioritizes our collective well-being over newer GDP growth are proliferating. We are now at a crossroads. One path will take us to a better world, more inclusive, more equitable, and more respectful of Mother Nature. The other will take us to a world that resembles the one we just left behind, but worse and constantly gone by nasty success. We must therefore get a job. The looming challenges could be more consequential than we have until now chosen to imagine. But our capacity to reset would also be greater than we had previously good. Woo, that's been a bit of a long one. um, and all in all, the book was interesting, but not really that consequential, given this. A lot of the predictions have come true, and it doesn't seem like we're actually going in the right direction. um, which, I, the world is turning into a mess. I think that can be seen by anybody with eyes. So, yeah, yeah. So next week, we will begin Vladimir Lenin's imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. So that will be something to think about. Uh, yeah. But that will be all for today. That's for tonight. We'll have to go to the gym and get to bed. um, Now I will probably be delaying the gaming stream until Friday. In fact, I'm going to put that in motion now. The gaming stream will be on Friday night, not tomorrow night. Um, and until then, um, I will continue playing Freedom Planet. I'll finish Freedom Planet uh, on Friday night. And then next week we'll begin Lenin's Imperialism, High Stages Capital. And until then, I will see you guys next time.